Welcome to the WattSherpa podcast, your guide to energy efficiency and savings.
So thank you so much for joining WattSherpa's first interview. As we've discussed over email so far, I'm building WattSherpa to help guide consumers on how they can adopt more clean energy or adopt clean energy practices and save money in the process. When I had first started researching consumer behavior and clean energy, I came across you, Dr. Reuven Sussman, who I'm thrilled to have as my first guest here for WattSherpa. Dr. Sussman is expert on energy efficiency behavior change. He co-chairs the annual conference on behavior, energy, and climate change called the BECC. Since 2016, he has been with the ACEEE, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. And he has been a frequent author on the psychology of climate change, which I think is a fascinating topic and one that I'm excited to dive into today.
Thanks, Carter. I am delighted and honored to be your first guest. I think it's great what you're trying to do here, and hoping I can help out. As you mentioned, I have a degree in psychology, social and environmental psychology. I apply that in my work at ACEEE to do research on how to change people's behaviors to be more energy efficient. And then we rate reports and try to put those reports in the hands of policymakers, businesses, nonprofits, et cetera, that can do things with them to make the world a more energy efficient and green place. So I don't know, that's about sums it up for me.
Got it. So the first question I have is what originally sparked your interest in clean energy and consumer behavior?
I guess it mostly started when I was in undergrad. I was doing a psych degree, which I found very fascinating because I just liked studying human behavior and how it's affected and how it can be changed. And I became quite educated on environmental sustainability issues and the importance of climate action, environmental sustainability. And so I thought, what can I do to marry these two interests? And I discovered the field of environmental psychology, which is basically applies the understanding of human behavior to change and encourage more environmentally sustainable behavior. And I've just been doing it ever since.
Got it. So obviously now, as I stated before, you're working with the ACEEE. Would you mind sharing more about it and your role within the organization?
Yeah. So ACEEE has been around since the 80s, 70s or 80s, formed in response to the oil embargo of the 70s. And at that time, energy efficiency was a strategy for reducing energy use because really we had to all tighten our belts. And since then, it's morphed into being a nonprofit that also advocates for energy efficiency because it's good for the climate and it's good for people and it's good for jobs. And it's been a very effective organization for getting government policies changed, both all three at the state, local, and federal level. And now we also do some help giving technical assistance to folks who are trying to be like governments, agencies, industries that are trying to become more efficient. My role in the organization is directing the Behavior, Health, and Human Dimensions program, which focuses specifically on human behavior and the social science sort of aspects of this work. A lot of the other teams are sector specific, like transportation, buildings, industry. And we work with all those other sectors to just inform them on how humans are an important part of the equation.
Got it. Interesting. And then another question is passionate supporters of clean energy are obviously going to be willing to spend extra money to implement it. But in order to broaden adaptation, I believe that clean energy needs to be on par and if not cheaper than traditional energy sources. So, how have you seen consumer energy change over your career?
Good question. So you make a good point that it being cheaper is a very important factor in getting people to change their behavior. That is very much the economics perspective. You make it cheaper, behavior will shift accordingly. And that is true. But I think what I'm often fighting against is the assumption that's the only way to shift behavior. I get this a lot in the energy world is that if the better, more efficient, more climate friendly decision was the cheaper one, or it was required by law, then people would just do it. And those are important levers, but they're not everything. Who among us, I guess maybe you don't have your driver's license, but people with driver's licenses know that they often drive above the speed limit, despite the fact that there is a speed limit doesn't mean everybody's driving it. Similarly, there are clean energy codes for buildings, and they're not always adhered to, even when they are implemented. And conversely, a lot of people will sort their recycling and compost in 6 different bins voluntarily without any financial incentive to do so. And so we like in the behavioral sciences to look at a systems approach and to really think about what drives human behavior beyond just mandates and incentives. I unfortunately can't tell you like the one silver bullet, the thing that is always driving behavior, because it really depends on the person, the context, etc. Yeah.
So, what do you think are the most effective methods beyond, obviously, like you said, the law and costs?
Yeah, there's so many things that matter. Okay. One method that's really popular in behavioral science and environmental psychology is the use of social norms, like telling you or the consumer what other people are doing, because that will invoke a sense of either competitiveness or like they're similar to me. And so maybe it'd be good for me too. Whatever the mode of comparison is, it changes people's behavior to be more in line with the norm. So that's one approach. One thing that we've used at ACEEE in our research a couple times, which I find kind of fun to think about, is the importance of context. Whenever anybody's making an evaluation of a product or a service or a value of anything, they're mentally bringing up like a comparison set of things. So is this thing in front of me? How does it compare to other examples that I'm thinking of? And if you can change the examples people are thinking of, then you can change the decision on the thing in front of you. For example, I did an online study where I changed the list of items that are recommended to a homeowner such that I removed the items that look so good that you're going to get them no matter what. And when I did that, remove the like no-brainer items from this list of upgrades that are generally pretty good, I found that people were more likely to pick the mid-range items, the items that are good, but seem bad in comparison to those ones that are really good. Another example of this is in energy efficiency real estate listings. We did a study looking at if you label real estate listings with the energy efficiency of those homes, do people buy more efficient homes? And we found that when you have a label that tells you not just how efficient this home is, but what is the maximum level of efficiency? Or maybe where does the dollar amount that you'll be spending on energy place along a continuum of possible dollar amounts? You're getting more context, and that's more effective at changing behavior. These are like simple things that without changing the cost of the item, without making a mandate and restricting freedom, you can shift people's behaviors in ways that they might not otherwise think about.
Got it. And it's interesting that you talk about all these alternative methods that a lot of people might not think about in driving consumer behavioral change. Would you mind talking a little bit about the different entities that play a role in this? Obviously, we have the government, nonprofits like the ACEEE, and also community leaders and individuals, and how those all play into supporting and driving those different methods of change.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a role for everybody, I think. The way I feel about our nonprofit in particular is that it's a bridge. We take the important work that's being done in academia, but is maybe more theory driven, and we translate it and package it, and sometimes conduct some of our own research based on that academic research in a way that's helpful for governments and businesses to take action. So businesses are looking for like profitable solutions for climate change. Governments are looking for the best way to serve the public. And so I think that it behooves nonprofits to provide both of those entities with the information they need in order to make change. Now, as an individual, you also have the ability to make change. And on an individual level, I like to think of two factors. So not just the change that you in particular are making, but the influence that you have on your social group. Because once a lot of people are making those changes, it snowballs and becomes more likely to continue happening. Put a solar panel on your roof. This is like one of the most conspicuous examples of energy efficiency. Then you're not just saving yourself money and reducing your carbon footprint. You're also showing others in the neighborhood that you're doing that. And there's a lot of evidence out there on solar power in particular that when people see that in their neighborhood, they're more likely to do it, and it spreads through a sort of contagion effect. And of course, there's roles for industry and government, and we need to study industry players especially, we need to study a lot more from the behavioral science perspective, what drives organizational change and such. Yeah. And then, of course, there's activists and advocates on the more activist side. And I think that activists serve to shift the conversation in the public dialogue. And although an activist doing a protest, for example, may not directly influence the likelihood of an industry making a decisional change, it does change the conversation and can like indirect pressure that when you negotiate later with that industry might actually have an impact.
Got it. And just expanding on that, how would you recommend that other students with interest in like these fields of clean energy get involved and become a part of that?
Yeah. Mm, I think that students and young people are a critical part of this discussion. It's important because young people are still learning their values that will be carried throughout their lives. And I think embedding at a young age a value of like energy efficiency, a value of like climate and thinking about climate and everything that you do is really valuable and can really create a long-term impact. So I think that what students can do is really educate each other, make a non-descriptive norm like descriptive. Clearly talk about what you're doing and the importance of it without being preachy. Set an example. And students also have the ability to set an example within their own homes. They can take what they're learning at home about climate change and talk about it with their families. And that is a way to make change that I think can be more effective than other social networks. What the issue is, and this isn't unique to students, but when people try to change other people, typically they stay within their own social circles. And that means that, okay, so if you're looking at potential impact, somebody who's not at all acting sustainably or doesn't know about the importance of climate action at all, that person's behavior is likely, like a change in that person's behavior is likely to be more impactful. They're going from 0 to, I don't know, 10 or 20 is much more impactful than somebody who's already at 90% behavior, already on board, going to 95%. And so that's the difficult part. How does how do you create influence among people that are not necessarily in your peer circle and already agreeing with you? Yeah, and we can go into that if you want, but that was more of my PhD research.
Yeah, I'd be happy to go into that. I had a question based around that, in that in many countries in Europe and across the world, I feel like we've seen the adoption of clean energy at a much more rapid
Mm.
pace than here in the United States. What do you think are like the main reasons for that?
It's a very complicated question. So, and I have to say that I'm a psychologist and behavioral scientist. I'm not like a world economist. From the psychology perspective, I will say that the United States is a very unique outlier in its lack of belief in climate change. Now, that's not to say that most people don't believe in climate change or that nobody believes in climate change. A lot of people do, but not as many as in the rest of the world. And so I'm from Canada, it's perfectly reasonable to talk about climate change in a government office in Canada because they have climate goals and they do things to mitigate climate change. During the Trump years, when I first moved, most of my time here in the US was during the Trump years. That was not, you could not say the word climate change in a government office. And I think things are a little bit better now. And I think generally there's a shift towards more belief in climate change and the need for action. But I do think that the public discourse on climate change is different in other places in the world. Here we do actions that are important, energy efficiency actions, because it's good for promoting equity and it's really good for energy security in the world. We're using less energy and it's really good for all these non-climate reasons. But by taking climate off the table as a reason to do things, you're handcuffing your ability to do some things, I think. There's also other issues with the United States and Canada are more spread out. They were more they're built largely after the automobile. And so the cities themselves have structural challenges that make it difficult to convert, make it easier for European countries to convert. Um, there's all kinds of structural issues that I'm not really an expert to talk on that, so I can't really get into it too much, but that's the sort of social psychology perspective.
Got it. Okay. And then last question, I don't want to hold you too long, but would you like to talk a little bit about the BECC conference, how it started and what its goals are?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, I love talking about Beck. The Beck Conference, Behavior, Energy, and Climate Change, is started in 2007 to bring together this like relatively small field of social scientists working to solve climate change. At that time, it was more like about climate change and energy efficiency. It's a little bit more about climate change now, but both still important. And it's still the premier conference bringing together this nexus of behavior, energy, and climate change. We get about 500 people a year. It's a place where academics and people doing research can meet the folks on the ground trying to make change that can use their research. Government officials are there, utilities, which are big investor in energy efficiency, maybe ironically, are all there. And everybody's working together towards the same goal. And they have an understanding that human behavior is important to think about. The conference happens in the fall every other year now. We just went to a biannual model. So next one's going to be in Sacramento in 2025. But we will be doing I don't know what the term is, online offerings, I guess, throughout 2024. We've always had a really great webinar series where we feature speakers that I think are really important, talking about cutting edge research in this area. And you can head over to beckconference.org for more information on that. We will be having some more this year, and you can check out what's going on as it happens on that website.
Sounds great. Amazing. That was my last question to ask you. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to do this interview and help out WattSherpa. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Give me a call anytime and keep up the good work.
Great. Thank you.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please like and subscribe and visit us at WattSherpa.com.